Hey there, students. Today I'm going to explain how to do the Pendulum Lab. A pendulum is when you have a weight hanging from a string and it can swing back and forth. Okay, so you need to, if you're a virtual student, you need to create your own pendulum. You need a piece of string or your headphone cables, something. I have a paper clip and some washers. If you don't have that, you could tie it onto a cup, and then you can use some sort of weights at home. I don't know, maybe sections like Legos or uh, equal size, like sets of quarters or nickels. But a pendulum is going to be the swinging back and forth object. Okay. For my physics students in class, we're going to be looking at the problem that we're trying to figure out is what are the variables that affect the period of the pendulum. So what variables affect the period of the pendulum? And you're going to write that in there. We have background information about what a pendulum is. The period is known as the number of times that of successive occurrences. Basically, how long does it take to swing back and forth, or how many times does it swing a full cycle through a minute? So we're going to measure in the number of swings down and back over the course of a minute. So the three variables that we're going to be looking at is we can change the number of washers or mass. So if I add more Legos or whatever it is that I'm using, I can change the mass. That's one of the tests. I can change the angle that I release it from. In class, we have protractors. If you're an at-home student, you're going to have to print off a protractor from online. You can just type in protractor and you should be able to find one. And you're going to print out the little half circle. Okay, and so we can change the angle. I'm going to call this a 90-degree angle. This around here is going to be around 75 or so, 60. I don't actually see what they are, but that's how we can measure what the angle is that we're releasing from. Okay, so we're going to generally, if you release it from here, which most of our tests are going to be a 90-degree angle, then you don't have to measure what the angle of release is. And the other thing that we can change is the length. Do we want to use a very small pendulum, a longer pendulum, or a really long pendulum? Okay, so you're going to have to be able to change and use different lengths for your pendulum. So when you're doing the test, first test that we're going to do is we're going to change the number of washers. When I do that test, I want to keep the length the exact same on every test, and I want to keep the angle the same. So the first test, we're trying to find the number of swings per minute, but I don't want to do this for a full minute, so I'm going to take it, I'm going to do it for 10 seconds, and then multiply whatever I get by 6. So that will tell me the answer. Okay, so I measure my length here. We do our first test. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You keep going for 10 seconds. You stop. Let's say it was 5 seconds. Then I would go through and calculate or how many of them there were. I would calculate how much there is. The second test is you're going to change the angle. Getting a phone call, which I'm ignoring so I can make this video. Second test, I'm going to keep the same number of weights and I'm going to change the angle. So I'll do it from this angle and I'll measure and I'll count how many swings it takes. 1, 2, 3, however many it does in a certain amount of time. The next test, I'm going to do the same number of masses, the same length. I'm going to change the angle and I'm going to measure that. The third test that we're going to do is we keep the washers the same and the angle the same, and I just change the length. Whenever you're doing a test of anything, an experimental design test, you can only change one variable at a time. So the first one, I keep the length the same and the angle the same, and I add more and more masses. The second test, we're testing angle. So if I'm changing the angle, I want to keep the length the same through all those tests, and the mass is the same through all those tests. And the third one, if I'm testing the length, I can change the length, but I'm going to keep the number of washers the same and the angle the same. After that, I'm going to be able to make a graph. If I open up the Pendulum Lab page, I can see right here 3 graphs. This gives me a link to Desmos, and I can make the graphs. And then at the end, you should be able to explain what factors affect a pendulum. And that's all that we got.